If you saw my previous video about slow cinema, you heard how I mentioned that film is inherently maximalist because of the countless moving parts that make up a film. From the script, to the camera work, to the acting, to the sound design, the list goes on. What makes cinema so incredible is that it combines all these aspects. Most great films don't just utilize one of the attributes of cinema, but rather has each aspect work woven together, making the film more than the sum of its parts. I think there are few directors that weave the different aspects of cinema together as flawlessly as Wong Kar-wai. Wong Kar-wai is possibly the greatest still living director. His filmography is stacked with fantastic stories of intimacy and human connection, and his films are characterized by stylized visuals and exceptional use of music. Wong Kar-wai's filmography is impressive, but his magnum opus is definitely his 2000 film, In the Mood for Love. In the Mood for Love is about two people who move into an apartment with their respective spouses, but eventually suspect that their spouses are cheating on them with the other person's spouse. They begin spending time with each other and eventually develop feelings for each other despite their marriages. Although they both know how they feel for each other, they decide to part ways and move on with their lives in unfaithful marriages. The film ends with Mr. Chow whispering a secret into a hollow and covering it with mud. The plot is relatively basic and straightforward, but as with most Wong Kar-wai films, just saying the plot is not the same as experiencing the movie. Like I said before, Wong Kar-wai weaves the different parts of cinema together to create an overall emotionality to his films that is far beyond the surface of the plot. A defining part of Wong Kar-wai's style is his use of music. His films have incredible and memorable needle drops that, combined with his camera work, create a tangible vibe to his films. He often uses the same song over and over in his films, creating a connection between all the scenes that contain that song. Despite the repetitive nature of the songs, you somehow never get bothered by them. In the Mood for Love has many songs in it, but the two main ones are Yumeji's theme and Kisas Kisas Kisas. These two songs are notable because I find they divide the film into two main acts. Yumeji's theme, played predominantly in the first half of the film, is indicative of the feeling of falling in love. It is a forbidden love, but you still fall for it. Kisas Kisas Kisas, which is played in the second half of the film, represents longing, nostalgia, and regret. This song is played after the two of them decide to part way, and it douses the film in this sense of melancholy nostalgia. Without the characters having to say anything, the song encapsulates their inner thoughts of longing for the other. Let's start with Yumeji's theme. Like I said earlier, Wong Kar-wai is known for repeatedly playing the songs in his films, and Yumeji's theme is not safe from this either, as the song is played 9 times throughout the film's 99-minute runtime. But the song isn't simply just played in the background while dialogue is edited on top of it. The scenes where Yumeji's theme plays are focused explicitly on the song. And it doesn't play just a snippet of the song, it plays the entire song. The visuals also connect with the song, putting the film in slow motion with this interesting blurry choppiness to it. These stylistic shots are always present with the use of Yumeji's theme, isolating the song as not merely a small piece of tone setting, but rather an integral part of the film. These scenes are not simply musical moments, but rather imperative scenes, more important than most of the dialogue scenes in the film. I can't play Yumeji's theme in this video because of copyright, but you should definitely listen to it. The piece has this beautiful duplicity to its emotions. It is both intimate and haunting. It utilizes both a waltz 3/4 time signature, while also the main melody is played by a solo violin. The rhythmic waltz sets a tone of intimacy and fluidity, while the isolated violin plays a beautifully haunting melody that indicates both solitude and a longing for connection. The violin bow is not pressing heavily on the strings, but rather gently gliding over them the way a gentle hand might brush against a future lover's. The way the note's intensity goes in and out like waves creates a feeling of both closeness and yet separation. As the intensity of the notes taper off at the end, it feels like two hands drifting farther apart. But as the notes increase in intensity, it feels just like the hands are moving closer together. Yumeji's theme, unlike Kisas Kisas Kisas, played later in the film, is purely instrumental, lacking any lyrics to explicitly explain its meaning. But the tone the piece sets tells the audience enough. Closeness but never touching, intimate but never together, love but also isolation. The lack of direct meaning also coincides with a sense of inexplicable love. When falling in love, it can be hard to express how you feel with words. The emotions you get when falling in love are ineffable and only really able to be expressed through effervescent art like Yumeji's theme. The first time we hear the song, we see a stolen glance between the two characters, a single look that speaks volumes. Not a single word was spoken in this scene, but the way they look at each other and the tone set by the song explains the emotions in the scenes more than any words could. Yumeji's theme is played 8 more times throughout the film in these similar scenes, recontextualizing the song as the romance progresses from a sidelong glance to sympathetic acquaintances to forbidden lovers. The second half of the film is dominated by the song Quizás, 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 a Cuban song about a will they, won't they relationship. The second part of the film, while still intimate, has a different context to its intimacy. It isn't the adrenaline of falling in love or the risque nature of a forbidden love, but rather a nostalgic longing and a lingering sense of regret. Similar to Yumeji's themes, the aesthetics and vibe the song creates, combined with the cinematography and performances, elicits the emotions that are needed to come across. However, translating Quizás shows the song's literal meaning is also applicable, not just the derived tone. Quizás translates to perhaps, and the first verse of the song translates to I always ask you what, where, how, and why. You always respond, perhaps, perhaps, perhaps. These lyrics express a similar feeling that the characters have. It's a romantic what if. Mr. Chow and Mrs. Chan decided to part ways, but what if they hadn't? They both expressed their feelings for each other, but the answer was always perhaps, leaving a lingering uncertainty. Their whole relationship is defined by perhaps. Perhaps they should leave their spouse, but it always stayed at perhaps, and never amounted to anything more than a memory. Outside of the lyrics, the song has a sultry and romantic atmosphere, like the tingling sensation of almost. The triple repetition of the chorus Quizás, Quizás, Quizás mirrors the repetitive nature of the music within the film, but also drives home their nostalgic angst. Saying perhaps once is just a ponder. Saying it twice is a realization. Saying it 3 times drills home a sense of regret and despair. Each time they say perhaps, the longing is emphasized and strengthened. Wong Kar-wai's style is notable for its use of music, but equally important are the visual storytelling he employs. In the Mood for Love, the visual style contains many of Wong Kar-wai's signature visuals, such as choppy slow motion. But one thing he does specifically for In the Mood for Love is his use of a voyeuristic camera. The story of In the Mood for Love is one of secrecy and privacy. Mr. Chow and Mrs. Chan hide their relationship from others, having to go to lengths to keep it private. When the rest of their apartment is out playing mahjong, they are forced to stay in their room the entire time, or else their secret will get out. When people become suspicious, they have to rent out an entire room in a separate building to find some privacy. The movie ends with Mr. Chow whispering a secret and covering it in mud. Wong Kar-wai creates the feeling of secrecy by his use of the camera. Almost every shot in the Mood for Love is through some sort of frame, whether it's through a doorway, through a hallway, through a mirror, or through a window. The camera always makes the audience feel like they are peeping in on something rather than being a part of it. Most films want the audience to feel like they are in the room with the characters, experiencing their emotions alongside them. But In the Mood for Love is deliberate in keeping the audience away from the characters, as if the characters are trying to hide their secret even from the audience. This sort of framing keeps the emotions and tensions between the characters heightened, as it elicits a more taboo and risque vibe. That taboo feeling elevates the budding romance, giving a sense of nervousness to a forbidden relationship. Intimacy in film is so often garnered through close-ups because the only time you would be this close to a person is for you to be intimate with them. In the Mood for Love does have some close-ups, obviously, but the main aesthetic is still through the voyeurism of the camera. Paradoxically, the camera being more removed from the characters heightens the intimacy because the audience feels like they shouldn't even be watching. This is a moment so private and intimate that the audience isn't even invited into it. In the Mood for Love is an extremely intimate, sensual, and sexual film, but weirdly enough has no sex scenes in it. The closest thing to sex in the entire film is Mrs. Chan sitting on Mr. Chow's bed, fully clothed in a kipao, and Mr. Chow sitting on a chair in the same room. Despite this, the film is one of the sexiest films ever made. I think having no sex scenes or nudity actually helps the film's sensual nature because it restricts the film to getting as close to sex as possible without actually doing it. Sex is obviously more than just a physical act. That's why things like foreplay, power dynamics, setting, mood, what you say to each other, the progression, and why there are certain kinks that have nothing to do with physical touch. Diving right into sex without any of the other extra aspects of it is way worse than building to it. This is what In the Mood for Love does so well. It builds these tensions that give you goosebumps and butterflies, but never fully finishes the act, so it leaves you in a constant state of sensual tension. In the Mood for Love doesn't feel like penetration, it feels like the sensual brush on your bare back. It feels like the aching desire of reaching for somebody and the buildup of almost touching but never going all the way. That aspect of In the Mood for Love is what makes it so sensual and one of the most fantastic romances ever made. A major part of the subtext of In the Mood for Love is social cues. While I obviously claim no authority on the historical and social context of 1960s Hong Kong, I think any viewer can derive some of that subtext. The way both the characters act feels like an almost frustrating dance around the point. They say things that beat around the bush rather than just explicitly expressing their emotions. Looks are clearly very important. Not only are the two leads incredibly attractive, but the characters clearly keep up with themselves. Mr. Chow's hair is always combed and he is always dressed very nicely. Mrs. Chan's hair is always up and she's pretty much always wearing a kipao, even when laying across Mr. Chow's bed. It is never explicitly stated, but it can be inferred that these people care a lot about what other people think. That is why they are so secretive about their relationship. They rent a whole new apartment because they're worried that the landlady and her friends will become suspicious of their behavior. They are well accustomed to the social norms of the time and are rigid in following them, despite what they are doing and what they want to do to be pretty taboo. That is why they are always so close to becoming true lovers, but never cross the line. Between them, there is always a social line that they toe as closely as possible without ever crossing. Although they both know they want each other, societal norms would shun them for their behaviors, so in the end they bow to societal expectations rather than their inner wants and needs. Every conversation they have is pleasant and about pretty much everything except how they feel for each other. One of the few criticisms I ever hear for In the Mood for Love is the characters are not very fleshed out. But I think that is a big part of the point. Mr. Chow and Mrs. Chan aren't necessarily exceptional people, but rather they are pawns for societal expectations. They never get to be themselves. We don't get to know too much about them besides what we see in their relationship. The voyeuristic cinematography allows us to peep in on the secret, the forbidden relationship, but the camera wasn't there for their previous secrets, who they were before the events of the movie. We never get to know their tragic backstory or what their darkest secret is because the only way we can divulge that information from them is to peep into their private conversations. And even within those conversations behind closed doors, they merely toe the line of the social contract. We don't get to know too much about them because to know each other would mean to express their feelings for each other. At the end of the film, we see Mr. Chow go to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Before the scene, Mr. Chow tells his friend about how people would whisper their secrets into a hole and then cover it in mud, allowing the earth to keep the secret for them. We see Mr. Chow whisper a secret into a hollow in Angkor Wat and cover it with mud. This scene has the same voyeuristic characteristics as much of the cinematography of the film. We aren't up close and personal with Mr. Chow, but rather it is as if we are a bystander watching a stranger whisper into the wall. Even though we have been watching the relationship unfold for the entire runtime of the movie, we're still never allowed into the characters. We aren't invited into their room. We aren't invited into their heads. We are simply peeping toms into their lives, and even at the end of the film, we are simply a bystander watching someone whisper something we will never know into the wall. Mr. Chow and Mrs. Chan never crossed the line of the social contract to truly become one together, so the audience never crosses the line of the camera's voyeurism. Mr. Chow and Mrs. Chan will never know each other on that deeper level, just as the audience will never get to know them on that deeper level.